Hello, and welcome back to the Striha Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Parker Striha, and on today's episode, I am going to be going over my first 2023 NFL mock draft. I'm by no means a professional, but I do love talking about sports, so thank you for joining me. Just a quick disclaimer before I really get into this. This is just what I would do. I didn't do any trades in this mock draft, even though in the future I will, because there are a couple big trades that I do think are going to happen. I'm also not a scout. I don't really have the facilities or the programs to look at a lot of film. I'm trying to get some of that stuff so I can start learning how to look at film and how to scout. So I'm not really going to go too in-depth on a lot of these players and why I think they're great or what I think they do right. Like, I'm not going to talk about, this defensive lineman, his pass rush moves are extremely great or he could work on that. I'm not doing that. I'm more so looking at players. Do I think they're a good fit for the team that picks them, and why do I think the team is picking them? So if a team has a glaring need at defensive tackle and I have them taking a defensive tackle, I'll kind of explain that, or that'll be my reason for it. So without further ado, with the number 1 overall pick, the Chicago Bears select Jalen Carter, a defensive lineman from Georgia. I mean, I'm a Georgia guy, love Jalen Carter. I think he's the best player in the entire class just based off of what I've watched. But the Bears kind of need everything. I don't think there's one glaring hole that they need to fill and that'll fix their team. Get Jalen Carter. He's going to come in, be an instant starter. And you're just you got to build that roster up. You got to get talent on the roster. And I think Jalen Carter does that. He just provides you a valuable franchise piece on that defensive line that you don't have. I also don't think the Bears will end up taking this pick. I think they will trade it, but that'll be expanded on more in a future mock draft. With the number 2 overall pick, the Houston Texans select Bryce Young, a quarterback out of Alabama. Texans need a quarterback. I don't hate Davis Mills, but I don't think he's the guy that's going to lead them to the promised land. They just signed new head coach DeMeco Ryans, and while he could go for a defensive guy, I think he's going to get his quarterback, his team's future franchise quarterback, and they're just kind of going to build from there. You got to get head coach and quarterback are the two most important positions on a team, in my opinion, and I think that's kind of a popular opinion, but you got to get the quarterback, you got the coach, go get Bryce Young and see what you can do with him. With the number 3 overall pick, the Arizona Cardinals select Will Anderson Jr., an edge rusher out of Alabama. They don't really have a lot when it comes to pass rushers, especially after J.J. Watt retired recently. Will Anderson is a freak, especially after the, I believe, 2021 season. He should have won the Heisman, in my opinion. Was arguably the best player in the NCAA or FBS football or college football in general. One of the best. Get him in there. Get your top-tier pass rusher, who I don't think the team has. And, I mean, you can't go wrong. You're not going to take a quarterback here because of Kyler Murray. Get Will Anderson and just kind of build pieces around this team. You need to build up the talent for a team that I don't think is very good. With the number 4 overall pick, the Indianapolis Colts select Will Levis, a quarterback out of Kentucky. They need to end their quarterback carousel with all these old quarterbacks. I know they're linked to Aaron Rodgers, but don't trade for him. That's not because I don't want Aaron Rodgers in Indianapolis. I just think they need to get their young quarterback. Sam Ehlinger is not your guy, but you just need your own guy. Since Andrew Luck has retired, they've had Carson Wentz. They've had Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers. They need to get a guy that they can develop and build around, and not some guy who is towards the end of his career. With the number 5 overall pick, the Seattle Seahawks select edge rusher Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech. Seattle needs pass rushers. That's pretty much all I got. Tyree Wilson is huge. He provides a really big presence on that defensive line. And outside of Uchenna and Wosu, I believe is how you pronounce it, I don't really like anything that they have on that defensive line. So I think they just need to improve overall. With the number 6 overall pick, the Detroit Lions select Devon Witherspoon, cornerback out of Illinois. He can play corner or safety as far as I am concerned. And the Detroit Lions, their secondary is, for a lack of a better term, trash. Like their secondary is awful, so they just need to put as much talent and resources into that room as possible. With the number 7 overall pick, the Las Vegas Raiders select Peter Skoronski, a tackle out of Northwestern. He's probably going to end up sliding into guard just because I've seen a lot of people say he has short arms, and I don't think that's really great for an offensive tackle. You want your tackles to be longer so they can stop those edge rushers from getting around them. The Raiders, I don't like their right tackle, their right guard, their center, their left guard. I love their left tackle, but that's still 4 out of 5 positions you need to fill, and I think Skoronski can fill any of those 4 except maybe center. With the number 8 overall pick, the Atlanta Falcons select C.J. Stroud, quarterback out of Ohio State. Yes, they got Desmond Ridder last year, but he was a 3rd or 4th round, maybe even a 5th round quarterback. You can't rely on him to progress and develop and be the savior of your franchise. If you are picking this high, get the guy you wholeheartedly believe can lead your team to the promised land and can be your franchise guy for the next 5, 10, 15 years. C.J. Stroud, one of the best quarterbacks available after Will Levis and Bryce Young go. So, you can't really go wrong with C.J. Stroud. He was amazing for Ohio State this year, especially against Georgia, which was unfortunate. But go out, get your guy. And to be honest, I think the NFC South is wide open next year. So if you can get a guy like Stroud to come in and you can continue and you have a really good offseason and continue to build this team, you could end up winning that division and making the playoffs. With the number 9 overall pick, the Carolina Panthers select Anthony Richardson, quarterback out of Florida. Now, he could definitely go a lot higher than this. He's still young. He's kind of like Trey Lance, in my opinion. I think he's a little bit bigger, but the one full season as a starter, that's really the only film you have to go off on him. But he's an elite athlete, and the Carolina Panthers cannot keep waiting to try to get their franchise quarterback. It's not Sam Darnold. It clearly wasn't Baker Mayfield when they traded him away after trading for him or cut him, however that whole situation went. It's not P.J. Walker. It's not Matt Corral. Get Anthony Richardson, and like the Falcons, you could win this division if you hit on this quarterback. With the 10th overall pick, the Philadelphia Eagles select Lucas Van Ness, an edge rusher out of Iowa. They have a lot of free agents and a lot of older players at that pass rusher spot, that edge rusher spot. Bring in Lucas Van Ness, develop him. Their defensive line coach has to be insane, just based off of the production that they've gotten out of this defensive line. So just bring in Lucas Van Ness, and you're really, it's a low risk, high reward pick in my opinion. He's not super developed, I don't believe, but you can really hopefully turn him into a freak on that defensive line. With the number 11 overall pick, the Tennessee Titans select Paris Johnson Jr., an offensive tackle out of Ohio State. They're probably going to cut Taylor Lewan, who is one of my favorite players in the league, but overall that offensive line is bad. Bring in Paris Johnson, one of the best tackles in the class, one of the better pass blockers in the entirety of college football, and you will have a stalwart at your either left or right tackle, depending on what they do with Taylor Lewan. With the number 12 overall pick, the Houston Texans select Jackson Smith-Njigba, a wide receiver out of Ohio State. You got your quarterback. Now go and get him a solidified number 1 receiver, or even if you think he's going to be your future number 2 receiver. That wide receiver room in Houston is awful. They're going to be trading or cutting Brandon Cooks this offseason. And outside of Cooks, they don't really have a lot. So bring in Jackson Smith-Njigba. He's going to produce. He's going to play great and pair well with Bryce Young. And I don't think they really need every single position. So, I could have went anywhere with this, and I think it would have been a good pick. With the number 13 overall pick, the New York Jets select Broderick Jones, a tackle from Georgia. I'll be honest, this might be hinting at a future mock draft. I don't think this pick will be taken by the New York Jets come April's draft. But If it is, they need offensive tackle badly. So bring in Broderick Jones, get rid of, I think it's Dwayne Brown, 38 or 39-year-old Dwayne Brown. Get a younger guy who's faster and can develop and be probably better than Dwayne Brown is and was. With the number 14 overall pick, the New England Patriots select Nolan Smith, an edge rusher out of Georgia. Outside of Matthew Judon, I don't like what they have for pass rushers. I think Nolan Smith is great. I think has a torn pec at the moment, but I do believe he's healing well enough to potentially be at the combine. I think he's great. I think New England has a hole to fill at that edge rusher spot, and Nolan Smith fits it perfectly. With the number 15 overall pick, the Green Bay Packers select Brian Brzee, a defensive tackle out of Clemson. I don't think their defensive line is very talented outside of Kenny Clark. Devontae Wyatt has talent, but he's also 24 or 25 already, going into his second year. Well, yes, he could be hitting his prime earlier. You're also getting more years with a guy like Brian Brzee, who is younger. He does have injury problems, but if you can kind of get around that, he could be a force to be reckoned with alongside of and right next to Kenny Clark. With the 16th overall pick, not the Washington Redskins, the Washington Commanders select Christian Gonzalez, a cornerback out of Oregon. Their cornerback group, awful outside of Kendall Fuller. So just get a guy in there, get talent in there, because that's the weak spot of that defense is the secondary, so you got to fill that hole however possible. With the 17th overall pick, the Pittsburgh Steelers select Joey Porter Jr., a cornerback out of Penn State. Like Washington, their cornerback group is awful. Just bring in talent in there to help at least try to fix that secondary as a whole. Minkah Fitzpatrick is really their only secondary player that I like, so bring in a guy who can be a potential Pro Bowl corner in the future. With the 18th overall pick, the Detroit Lions select Myles Murphy, an edge rusher out of Clemson. I don't think you can count on James Houston, or I think that's his name, being your number 2 pass rusher for the future. You have to get a guy like Myles Murphy, a first-round talent in there who can play right alongside or right across from Aiden Hutchinson, and have James Houston be the 3rd or 4th guy in that rotation, and you can wreak havoc on offensive lines. Outside of Aiden Hutchinson and James Houston, I don't think their pass rush is good, so they also just kind of need to bring talent in. With the 19th overall pick, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select Michael Mayer, a tight end out of Notre Dame. I'll keep it simple. Their tight end group is horrible. I don't trust anyone in that room to be a starting caliber tight end for a full season or even in the future. This Tampa Bay team's probably going to get torn down a little bit unless they think they can get a quarterback and in to immediately keep them in contention, but they just need a tight end regardless of what they do with quarterback or the rest of the team. With the 20th overall pick, the Seattle Seahawks select Osiris Torrance, a guard from Florida. While that offensive line, the 2 rookie tackles from this last season are great, I don't trust the interior of that offensive line. Bring in a guy like Torrance, who'll be a day 1 starter, and he can help block for whoever their quarterback's going to be, and he can help block for and protect a guy like Kenneth Walker. With the 21st overall pick, the Los Angeles Chargers select Bijan Robinson, a halfback out of Texas. This is probably a controversial pick, but I don't like what they have in Austin Eckler. I think he's a good running back, but they need to bring in a guy like Bijan Robinson who can be a 3 or 4 down running back, and just a guy who you can rely on every single play. He's not as fragile as a guy like Austin Eckler is, and I think they need a bell cow running back that they can give 20, 25, 30 carries to in a single game, and they know he's not going to get worn down and he's not going to be out for the next 3 games because of it. With the number 22 overall pick, the Baltimore Ravens select Cam Smith, a cornerback out of South Carolina. Their cornerback group is getting old. They need a guy to go alongside of Marlon Humphrey because they are probably not going to retain or bring back Marcus Peters. Bringing a guy like Cam Smith will probably be an instant day 1 starter, and that just kind of helps secure that cornerback 2 spot. With the number 23 overall pick, the Minnesota Vikings select Siaki Ika, a defensive lineman out of Baylor. The guy's a freak, Minnesota needs interior defensive line help. I probably could have had them go with the corner here, but I think if you can't win with your defensive line, or if you don't have a strong defensive line, it doesn't matter how good your secondary is. They're going to look bad anyways. So just build up that defensive line as much as you can. With the 24th overall pick, the Jacksonville Jaguars select Brian Branch, a safety out of Alabama. I don't like their safety group. That's pretty much all I got to say. I think they need to bring in talent and overhaul that entire position group. Brian Branch is a guy that can be a day one starter for them, and it's just an overall really, really good player. With the 25th overall pick, the New York Giants select Jordan Addison, a wide receiver out of USC. One of the best receivers in the entire class. He showcased that, I believe, at Pittsburgh and then at USC this season. The Giants need a guy they can rely on as a number one receiver, and I believe Addison is that guy. Their wide receiver group as a whole is just awful, so any talent you can bring in is good talent. With the number 26 overall pick, the Dallas Cowboys select Emmanuel Forbes, a cornerback out of Mississippi State. Everything outside of Trayvon Diggs in that cornerback group is bad. Bring in talent, that's all I gotta say. With the number 27 overall pick, the Buffalo Bills select Quentin Johnston, a wide receiver out of TCU. They need another guy in that room. I don't think you can really, at the moment, I don't think you can trust anyone outside of Stephon Diggs, and he may want out of Buffalo in the future. Bring in a guy like Johnson, stupid fast, and if you put him with Josh Allen's arm, you could really have some scary things going with that offense. With the 28th overall pick, the Cincinnati Bengals select Anton Harrison, an offensive tackle out of Oklahoma. The offensive tackles haven't worked out for you, the ones that you thought were going to help fix that offensive line. I believe they can cut ties with Lyle Collins, and it won't really hurt them. What's his name? Jonah Williams. I don't think they could really get hurt that bad by cutting ties with him. Bring in a guy like Harrison. Try to fix that offensive tackle position that has been bad for years. With the 29th overall pick, the New Orleans Saints select Hendon Hooker, a quarterback out of Tennessee. Hooker was one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football this year before tearing his ACL, but he is also on the older side. I think he is 25 or going on 25 at the moment. But like I said, is coming off that ACL injury. You don't know exactly when he's going to be available, but the Saints need a franchise guy or potential franchise guy because it is not Taysom Hill, Andy Dalton, or Jameis Winston. With the 30th overall pick, the Kansas City Chiefs select Zay Flowers, a wide receiver out of Boston College. They very well could lose Juju Smith-Schuster, which doesn't really leave their wide receiver room with a lot of talent. Bring in a guy like Flowers, cheap, young, super fast, and he can just kind of be a plug-and-play day one starter for that offense. And with the 31st overall pick, the Philadelphia Eagles select Trenton Simpson, a linebacker from Clemson. That linebacker group in Philly could use some work. Kaiser White is probably going to get overpaid by another team this offseason. I don't know exactly what TJ Edwards' contract is looking like, but I also think he may be a free agent. So you kind of just need to bring talent in to that linebacker group so you can maintain that defensive success for the future. But as always, I'm your host, Parker Striha, and this has been the Striha Sports Podcast. Our random sport fact of the day is that tug of war was an Olympic event between 1900 and 1920. As always, thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for whenever a new video gets posted.